right up now at 973ESPN.com. John McMullen has his first attempt at the 2016 NFL Draft. His mock draft is up. We'll get his thoughts on the Senior Bowl, some other news and notes around the NFL with 973ESPN.com's Eagles insider John McMullen now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. What's going on, John?
Hey, Mike, how are you? Interesting you bring up Prison Break because that's what I felt like when I was trying to get away from the Pro Bowl. That's how bad it is.
Why did you feel that you had to stay through the Pro Bowl?
I was going to write a column about just how bad it was for today's pigskin, and I never even did it. That's how bad it is. I can't even stomach it. At one point, when it was AFC versus NFC, I could accept it as a necessary evil. You know, as a whole, I don't think football is a game that lends itself to an all-star format as opposed to, say, something like baseball or basketball, because it's too violent in a sport. It's too physical. You can't go 75% playing football. So I think that's the biggest hurdle. But then when you change the entire format into this nonsense, it's become even a step further. We always talk about the NFL is basically bulletproof, and for the most part they are, but it proved yesterday lowest ratings in history for the Pro Bowl. So they finally came up with a loser in this format for the Pro Bowl.
I was glad to see that. I actually was, just as you said, the lowest ratings of 5 share on the overnights. I was finally like, thankfully, people stopped watching this thing, because one of the reasons why it was still on, John, is because people kept watching it.
Yeah, exactly. It was always, with the AFC and NFC, as bad as it was always the highest rated all-star game, believe it or not, even better than baseball or basketball. But now it's so bad and just so, I don't know, they called it, when they made this change, they called it fantasy football for real. And you and I have talked on the air enough to know I'm not a big fan of fantasy football. I put that out there, but I have no problem with people who like it and enjoy it. But this is just utter nonsense. It's got to stop. And if you're going to have the game, you have to go back to AFC versus NFC.
I would agree. If they're going to do something, at least put some sort of real game going on out there. This fantasy thing with not even real coaches. It's ridiculous. I didn't watch it. I haven't watched the Pro Bowl. I can't remember the last time that I actually watched it, but I'm hopefully, because didn't Travis Kelce or Tyler Eifert or somebody yesterday leave in a walking boot or something?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why, you remember the big Sean Taylor hit, everybody keeps playing it over and over to this day. That's one of the reasons why the game can't work, because you can get hurt, and nobody wants to get a high-level player injured in a goofy format where it doesn't mean anything. It's difficult to play all-star games in football for that reason.
John, before we jump into some other things here, I want to first the website sportrack.com. It's a contract website. You plug in the guy's name, he tells you what the market value is for that player. So I was fooling around with it this weekend. Sam Bradford, 3 years, $55.9 million. It's an annual average value of 18.6. Does that sound like something that would the Eagles would be okay with, and something Bradford would agree to?
Yeah, I think he's going to get slightly more than that. But it's going to be in that range, anywhere from 18 to 21 million. And as I said, even on the low end, I would not be okay with that. I kind of wrote it in my mock draft. It's no matter what context you want to put on it, you can do whatever you like. The bottom line is Sam Bradford is well underwater as a starting quarterback in the NFL, and I would not want to allocate $18 million per year for the next 3 years for that type of quarterback. And if there is one of the top 3 available, number 13 overall, I think you have a small opportunity to kind of reboot this franchise. And I think the Eagles are starting to think that way and say, that's a lot of money to pay for a guy who's basically proven nothing as a starting quarterback in this league.
The other guy I plugged in was Vinny Curry, 4 years, $26.9 million. That's an average of 6.7. Does that get it done?
Yeah, that would get it done yesterday, but Vinny's smart enough to know. Now, that's a great site. By no means, I think everyone should go there, encourage them to check out all contracts. I use it all the time. But what they do is they use, average for players of a similar take. And when we're talking about Vinny Curry, the ceiling is much higher than his numbers would indicate, his past. So I think he's going to get a lot more than that. Whether he's worth it or not will ultimately be proved down the line. But people around the league, if he gets to free agency, kind of realize this is a guy who doesn't have a lot of wear and tear on his body because he hasn't played that much during his rookie contract, and they see he was in a system that wasn't suited to his strengths, and that's the kind of guy that can really, really cash in free agency. Similar guy in Minnesota, Everson Griffin, who just played in the Pro Bowl. His rookie contract, Jared Allen was still there, didn't play all that much, and the Vikings gave him a monster second-time deal, his second contract, and people were raising their eyebrows. They're like, what are you giving this guy this money for? They saw the ceiling in him. They were correct, and that's the same type of thing I could see happening for Vinny Curry.
All right, John, I know your mock draft. Your first attempt at the mock draft is up at 97.3 ESPN.com. This is the post-Senior Bowl edition here. First, before we kind of go over the mock draft, what were some of the standouts from that Senior Bowl that made you take notice?
Well, I think it started with Carson Wentz, and everybody was so interested to see him. He's got such a great skill set, but you also have to be realistic about it, and that's a big leap from a Division I AA school. Now they call it FCS to jump to the NFL. And I think a lot of people, a lot of scouts around this league are looking at him and saying, of the three top quarterbacks, we're also talking about Jared Goff from Cal and Paxton Lynch from Memphis, he might have the best skill set. The only question is, how does he continue when you take that big leap up in competition? And that's a concern because I think he'll be in the conversation for number 2 overall with the Cleveland Browns. But the Browns have had such a tortured history at the quarterback position. That would be a very, very big chance to take, and I think they're more likely to err on the side of caution with a guy like Goff who's played at a high-level college and more people think is NFL ready right away.
Of the next group of guys, you mentioned Goff, and you have him going number 2 to Cleveland. Paxton Lynch is the other guy who's a first-rounder, and then Cameron Wentz, who a lot of people seem to like. He seems to be the hot name, as we talked about last week there. By the way, Dak Prescott won the MVP game. But who's that number 2 guy now behind Goff?
Well, I think it is going to be Wentz. I think the one guy that has, taken a step back, at least recently, and remember, this is not a senior, so he doesn't get an opportunity to play in the Senior Bowl or anything of that nature, and that's Lynch. But this is very, very early in the process, so we still have the scouting combine later this month. We still have all the pro days, so there's time for guys, even Connor Cook, who I have going in the first round. A lot of people don't any longer, and that's because he skipped the Senior Bowl, and that turned a lot of people off. But he still has plenty of time to recover, and if he has a good pro day, there's enough teams desperate for quarterback help that even a guy like him can get himself back in the conversation.
And, you mentioned, and you do have the Eagles taking a quarterback at number 13, but it's not Wentz, who you believe will not be there, Paxton Lynch. And some people thought that he would have been the right kind of fit for Chip Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, he's very athletic. There's no question about it. And we all talk about mobility, and some people say Chip needs it. Some people will insist he doesn't need it. I think it's pretty evident that his offense runs better with a guy who has mobility. But this isn't a quarterback that is dependent on a zone read attack. I mean, this is the best athlete of the three top prospects, probably has the highest ceiling of the three top prospects, might also be the most raw as far as an NFL standpoint goes, at least thus far. But he projects. He's a big kid. He can throw from the pocket. It's not just about the athleticism of him.
Yeah, and of course, that number 13 spot for the Eagles will be very interesting because, they need interior line. We talked about Peters, too, so tackle would be a spot that might be on the docket. If they went defense, is there a defensive position that fits at 13?
I don't think there is for the Eagles. I think if there is one, it would be defensive tackle. But I talked about it, and this is strange because obviously if you look at the Eagles last season and you look at the numbers and you say there should be plenty of room for improvement on the defensive side of the ball. But actually, the Eagles are pretty comfortable with what they have, especially in the front seven. And if you look at the corners, I think the really, really good ones are going to go way before number 13, guys like Jalen Ramsey from Florida State, Vernon Hargraves from Florida. So they won't be there. They would certainly be players you would have to take, but I don't think they're going to drop that far. If there's one position, it would be defensive tackle, not because Benny Logan doesn't project as a very good player under Jim Schwartz, because I believe he does, and certainly Fletcher Cox is an all-pro level talent. But there's not much depth there.
Yeah, and we'll see. As you mentioned, the Senior Bowl in the books. But once we get a little deeper into the draft season, you're probably going to see these guys kind of move up and down here. And as you were doing this mock draft, who are some of the guys that listeners should keep their eye on through this draft process that you have in the first round?
Well, I think we just talked about corner, the top guys. I think the kid from Clemson, Mackenzie Alexander. If the Eagles did want to go defense, he seems to be going up a lot of boards. And now that Chip Kelly's gone, they had this philosophy that you had to fit a certain mold. And a kid like that, he's not very big. He's not long, and that's what certainly Chip Kelly was looking for, Bill Davis was looking for. But all he does is just make plays, and he's only about 5'10", 190. So if they're really, really looking for help at corner, he could be an option. And I think he's going up. I just mentioned Connor Cook at Michigan State. I think he's one of the most interesting prospects because, you rewind a few months and he would have been in the conversation to be a top 5 quarterback, and all of a sudden he's fallen out of the first round. So I think he's going to be sort of that herky-jerky prospect that might jump up, might jump down, and might be all over the board as we go through into the spring. And a kid I love, everybody talks about Shaq Lawson from Clemson. The kid on the other side, Kevin Dodd, who was tremendous in the national championship game. I compared him to Zach Martin as far as a safety pick. Whoever gets him and wherever they get him, he'd be a rock-solid NFL player for 10 years.
Yeah, so the draft process underway with the Senior Bowl in the books. We'll dive into it a little bit more. Tomorrow we'll go deeper into John's mock draft. We'll be live at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City, and the full mock draft up right now to see who your favorite team he has going there. And I can see from this mock draft who you have winning the Super Bowl. Little insight there, right?
It is a spoiler there.
There you go.
The presumptive winners, and I'll give you a hint. The presumptive MVP is on the presumptive winner.
A couple NFL news and notes here. I want to get your take on Calvin Johnson retiring here and whether or not this will be more of a trend now that these guys are going to get in and get out. I mean, not that he's got in and got out. He's played 10 years in the league, which kind of unbelievable to think about that he's been in the league that long because it seems like yesterday he started this thing. But there's been murmurs about it, and I guess it's not official, but reports are that he is done playing in the NFL.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure about that. I'm really not. One thing about the NFL is it's a grind. And if you look at a guy like Calvin Johnson, you just looked at him and you look at him physically, obviously he spends an inordinate amount of time keeping himself in shape. And there's a lot of guys, after the season that say, man, I don't want to go through this again. And all of a sudden they go away for a couple of weeks, recharge the batteries, and have a change of heart. And I think that has an opportunity to happen with Calvin Johnson. The second part is he's got a huge salary cap number on the books for next year. So there was talk before that the Lions were going to release him simply because of that number. He was going to have to renegotiate or they were going to let him go. So I think there's more in play here than you've seen when people say Calvin's retiring. First of all, as you mentioned, he has not confirmed it. There's contract issues and the fact of whether he wants to play. It's conceivable he doesn't want to play, but this could also be jockeying to either get a better deal from the Lions or get his outright release and go to somewhere. Could you imagine him in New England, for instance?
Well, and John, is this right? Is this his ploy to say, look, I want to retire and then kind of break it, and then mysteriously sometime in August he feels like playing again?
Well, that could happen too. He might not want to go through the off-season stuff. Now, he can't retire from the Lions and then say come back and play for the Patriots. They would still have his rights, but until they release him. So he's
right. But much like Favre did, where he retired and then decided he wanted to play, and then the Packers basically said, "All right, we'll accommodate you."
Exactly. And Calvin Johnson doesn't need to show up in May for rookie camps and mini camps and OTAs and things like that. The Lions know he's going to be in shape. Any potential team, it's never been an issue with this guy. He's in superlative condition. That's not an issue. He doesn't need it. He might not just want to go through it.
John, CBS, NBC combined for almost $1 billion package for Thursday Night Football, so that's not going away anytime soon.
No, and nobody expected to because it's a cash cow. We just ripped the NFL with the Pro Bowl, but then they get another $1 billion for the Thursday night package. And if you look at the history of those games, they're not very aesthetic. Those short weeks where you don't have a lot of practice time, the players hate it, the coaches hate it. But when somebody whips out that checkbook and is willing to give you that much money, the NFL can't turn it down, and that's where we are, unfortunately. I'm not a big fan of the Thursday games. You kind of, obviously on Thanksgiving, it's a good tradition. You enjoy it, but throughout the whole season, I don't think it's a good thing for the product, but you can't turn down that kind of money.
Nope, and what's your take on the Raiders in Vegas? The NFL said that Vegas not off limits. You buying it?
No. I don't think they have any interest in Vegas. I don't think a lot of people know Vegas is not that big of a market to begin with. And as far as television viewership, so that's one issue. Obviously, legalized sports gambling, they want to stay away. 3/4 of the owners have to approve any move, obviously. They're going to say it for collusion purposes that, no, everybody's on the table, but when it comes down to it, there's going to be a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of putting arms behind the back to say, no, we're not going to allow this team to move to Vegas. And I think the NFL's mentality is they want San Diego and Oakland to get something done in their home markets, and that'll be what they're working for as far as the potential end game.
John, one thing the NFL officiating, Dean Blandino, had said that the catch rule is in a good place and that there's no overhauls, to come. If I were to ask you, what could they do to change the catch rule?
They could go to the local bar and ask the 10 drunks if that's a catch or if that isn't a catch, because they would do a better job. I think, they have to be more realistic and use more common sense, and that's when it comes to it, because when you talk about the differences between, say, a runner going over the goal line as opposed to a receiver who's got to be like a flying Walenda to come down with a catch and still hold on to the football. There's some common sense ground in there that you could apply to make things easier, but for whatever reason, the NFL believes this is easier for their officials the way they go about it now. I don't agree with it. I think most people don't agree with it, but that's where we are, and I don't think you're going to see significant change anytime soon.
The man watched the Pro Bowl yesterday, Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. John McMullen, his first mock draft is up at 97.3ESPN.com. Tomorrow we'll have plenty more on the Super Bowl and all things NFL and others. I was at that Sixers game Saturday. I had a great time there, John. The energy in that building was there. And I got to tell you, if you get a chance to watch the Warriors in person, they're worth the price of admission. They are the Harlem Globetrotters on the court in the NBA. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's great that the Sixers played that well and we're in the game late. But I want to ask you, and I was going to ask you tomorrow, but I'll ask you now. What was the ratio, Warriors jerseys to Sixers jerseys?
I opened up the show with that. I actually was surprised because when I went to Sixers-Lakers, the place was like 50-50 almost. There were Lakers fans there to see the Lakers. Lakers fans are all over the place. I would say there was not as many Warriors fans there as you would think. Now, obviously, it's 3,000 miles away, but so is L.A. But L.A. is a nationwide team. Golden State really isn't. I think there was mostly Sixers fans there.
All right, I'm
younger
glad
kids.
I was afraid.
Younger kids.
I'm surprised by that because, as you know, I covered the NBA for a long time, as you know, and I can tell you, traveling all over this country covering that league, I could count the number of Warriors jerseys I saw that entire time on one hand.
Yeah, well, again, I agree. I think the really young kids are wearing Curry jerseys, but it's not like you have grown-ups who are like Cowboys fans and Lakers fans because of their past success. Grown-ups are not bandwagon Golden State fans. They have no past success, so I don't think you see as much. I think people were there to see Curry. But when that game got close, that place was 19,000 standing up cheering for the Sixers.
All right, I'm proud of Philadelphia. I was afraid it was going to be the opposite, and everybody was going to be just obviously. And I understand people should want to go see Steph Curry. He's that good. He's that talented. That transcendent of a player. But when it comes down to it, you got to root for the home team.
Yeah, we'll dive more into that tomorrow. We're live at the Golden Nugget, John and I, of course, here on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Mike.